February 14th, 2023. A police dispatch in Coldfoot, Alaska, received a call that was dismissed as a hallucination. A woman claimed she had dragged 15 massive timber wolves into her living room to save them from a historic blizzard. She thought she was saving a local pack from freezing to death. She was wrong. What she actually pulled from the snow wasn't just a pack, it was the royal guard of the Blackwood dynasty. And the wolf she wrapped in her own blankets? That was Kelvin Blackwood, the Alpha King, who was currently being hunted by his own brother. This is the true story of Mina Varkov, the forgotten Omega who accidentally changed history. The thermometer on the porch of the Black Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary read 42 degrees below zero. It was the kind of cold that didn't just bite, it consumed. Mina Varkov adjusted her scarf, her breath pluming in thick, white clouds that froze instantly against the wool. At 26, Mina was known in the isolated town of Coldfoot as the Wolf Girl, a derogatory slur tossed around by the local shifters who viewed her as a defect. In the hierarchy of werewolf society, she was lower than an Omega. She was a dull. She had the genetics, but she couldn't shift. Her scent was faint, almost human, and to the powerful packs that ran the territory, she was invisible. That invisibility suited her fine. It allowed her to run this sanctuary, patching up foxes, eagles, and regular wolves that the supernatural world ignored. But tonight, the silence of the tundra was broken by a sound that made Mina's blood run cold. It wasn't the wind. It was a whimper. Not the high-pitched cry of a dog, but the guttural, vibrating distress of something massive. Mina grabbed her heavy-duty flashlight and the rifle she kept for bears, pushing out into the storm. The wind screamed, threatening to tear the door off its hinges. She fought her way toward the tree line, where the sanctuary property ended and the deep wilderness began. The beam of her flashlight cut through the swirling snow, landing on a mound of black fur. "Easy," she whispered, though the wind snatched her voice away. She approached cautiously. It was a wolf, a timber wolf, but of a size that defied biology. It was easily 200 pounds, its fur matted with ice and something darker. Blood. Mina knelt, her gloved hands checking for a pulse. It was faint, arrhythmic. Then she saw the others. The flashlight beam swept left, then right. Her heart hammered against her ribs. There were bodies everywhere. A massacre in the snow. 1, 2, 5, 10. She counted 15 wolves in total, scattered in a defensive circle, as if they had been fighting back to back before the cold took them. They weren't dead. Not yet. But in this temperature, with their injuries, they had minutes. "I can't leave you," Mina gritted out. She had no ATV. The engine wouldn't start in this cold. She had a sled and her own 2 hands. What happened next was a feat of endurance that locals still debate to this day. Over the course of 3 grueling hours, Mina Varkov, the defective Omega, the girl with no strength, dragged 15 massive wolves, one by one, onto a plastic sled and hauled them 300 yards into her reinforced barn. Her muscles burned with lactic acid. Her lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. But she didn't stop. The last wolf she retrieved was the largest. He was jet black, darker than the night surrounding them. He lay in the center of the carnage, his body shielding a smaller, silver wolf who had already succumbed to the cold. As Mina grabbed the black wolf's scruff to heave him onto the sled, his eyes cracked open. They were gold, molten, terrifying gold. An alpha's eyes. He let out a low growl, a warning, but his head fell back into the snow, too weak to fight. "Save your breath, big guy," Mina panted, wiping sweat and ice from her brow. "You can kill me later. Right now you're just heavy." She hauled him into the barn, collapsing the moment the heavy doors latched shut. 15 apex predators were now unconscious on her floor. She had no idea she had just kidnapped the most powerful political entity in North America. The barn was warmed by industrial heaters, the air thick with the smell of wet fur, antiseptic, and copper. Mina moved with the efficiency of a trauma surgeon. She had set up IV lines for the 3 in the worst condition, using fluids she had stockpiled for emergency wildlife rescue. She moved from wolf to wolf, checking temperatures, cleaning jagged wounds that looked suspiciously like claw marks from other shifters, not natural causes. It was around 3 a.m. when the atmosphere in the barn shifted. The air pressure dropped. The static electricity that usually signaled a storm spiked inside the room. Mina was kneeling beside the massive black wolf, the one with the golden eyes. She was carefully cutting away matted fur from a deep gash on his flank. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" she murmured, applying a salve. "Whatever attacked you, it didn't finish the job." She turned to grab a bandage roll. When she turned back, the wolf was gone. In its place lay a man. Mina gasped, stumbling back and knocking over a tray of instruments. The clang of metal on concrete was deafening in the quiet barn. He was naked, shivering violently, his skin pale but flushed with the heat of the fever. Even in this state, barely conscious and bleeding, he was terrifying. He was huge, corded with muscle that spoke of a lifetime of combat. His black hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat. This wasn't just a shifter. Shifting back when the body is in critical condition is usually fatal. It takes too much energy. Only an alpha of a royal bloodline could force the change to heal faster. Mina grabbed a thermal blanket and rushed forward, her instinct to heal overriding her fear. "Don't move," she ordered, throwing the blanket over him. "You're in shock." The man's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. His grip was like a vice, bruising instantly. He pulled her down, his face inches from hers. Those golden eyes were wide, delirious, searching her face. "Where?" His voice was gravel, ruined by the cold. "Where is Elias?" Mina winced at the pain in her wrist but didn't pull away. "The others?" "They're here, all of them. They're sleeping." "My pack," he rasped. "Are they alive?" "Yes," Mina said firmly. "I pulled all 15 of you in. You're safe." The man stared at her, his gaze dropping to her throat, then back to her eyes. He seemed confused. He inhaled sharply, smelling her. "Omega," he whispered, the word laced with confusion. "No pack scent." "Rogue." "I'm Mina," she said, prying his fingers off her wrist. "And I'm the reason you're not a popsicle. So lie back down." He didn't lie down. He tried to sit up, groaning as the wound on his flank stretched. "I need security. We were ambushed. They know we're here." "Who knows?" Mina asked, pushing him back down by his shoulders. It was like pushing a boulder. "The rebels!" he spat. "My brother's men!" Mina froze. The news had been full of it for weeks. The civil war brewing in the southern territories. The challenge for the high seat. The current Alpha King, Kelvin Blackwood, had vanished during a diplomatic tour of the North. She looked at the man's face again. The sharp jawline, the scar through the left eyebrow. She had seen this face on the news, usually wearing a tailored suit, standing on the steps of the Capitol. She looked around the barn. 15 wolves. The Royal Guard. "Oh God," Mina breathed. "You're Kelvin Blackwood." The man's eyes fluttered shut, his energy spent. "Not king right now," he mumbled, passing out. "Just tired." Mina stood up slowly. Her sanctuary, her safe haven, had just become the most dangerous place on Earth. She walked to the window and looked out at the storm. Tire tracks, fresh ones, barely being covered by the snow, stopped at the edge of her driveway. Someone had followed the drag marks. The ambush wasn't over. It was just waiting for the storm to break. Mina didn't panic. Panic was a luxury for people who lived in cities with 911 dispatchers who actually picked up the phone. In Cold Foot, panic was just a faster way to die. She moved away from the window, crouching low. The tire tracks outside were heavy, all-terrain treads, likely a modified SUV. They had stopped at the perimeter, about 200 yards out. They were waiting. "Why are they waiting?" she whispered to herself. "Because they're waiting for the storm to break," a voice growled from the floor. Mina turned. Kelvin had pulled himself into a sitting position against a stack of hay bales. He looked like death warmed over, his skin grey, sweat beading on his chest, but the authority in his voice was undeniable. He was used to being listened to. "They can't breach the perimeter without risking getting stuck in the drifts," Kelvin continued, his breathing laboured. "They're scouts, calling in the heavy hitters." Mina walked over to a metal cabinet and unlocked it. She pulled out a heavy, bolt-action hunting rifle and a box of ammunition. "Well, I hope your brother's friends like bear traps, because the property is littered with them." Kelvin narrowed his eyes. "You have a perimeter defense?" "I run a sanctuary for injured predators in the middle of nowhere," Mina said, loading the rifle with a satisfying clack-clack. "Poachers try to come here all the time to finish off what they started. I don't let them." She tossed a bundle of clothes at him, flannel shirts and heavy work pants that belonged to her late father. "Put these on. You can't fight naked, Your Majesty." Kelvin caught the clothes, a flicker of amusement crossing his painful expression. "You have a sharp tongue for an Omega. And you have a lot of enemies for a king." As Kelvin struggled to dress, the other wolves began to stir. It was a chain reaction of groans and shifting limbs. Mina watched as the massive timber wolves shifted, bones cracking and reshaping until the barn floor was covered not with animals, but with 14 naked, shivering men and women. They were the royal guard, the elite. Even half dead, they moved with a synchronized discipline. A tall man with a shaved head and a jagged scar running down his neck stumbled forward. He fell to one knee in front of Kelvin. This was Bram, the king's beta. "Alpha?" Bram rasped. "Status?" "Compromised," Kelvin said, buttoning the flannel shirt which was tight across his broad shoulders. "We're in a civilian structure. Hostiles at the perimeter. And we're—" He paused, looking at his shaking hands. "We're not healing." Mina stepped forward. "That's because it wasn't just the cold." The room went silent. 15 pairs of predatory eyes locked onto her. Mina pointed to the silver wolf, the one who had died before she could get him inside. "I checked him before I dragged you in. His blood didn't coagulate right. It was too thin. And your vomit smells like almonds." She walked over to Bram, grabbing his chin and tilting his head back to check his gums. They were a sickly blue. "Cyanide mixed with wolfsbane," Mina diagnosed grimly. "A slow-acting neurotoxin. They didn't just ambush you. They poisoned your food supply hours before the attack." Bram knocked her hand away, snarling, "Don't touch me, Omega." "Stand down, Bram," Kelvin barked. His voice cracked, but the command held. "She saved us. She's a dull," Bram spat, eyeing Mina with disdain. "She has no scent. She's a liability." "I'm the liability holding the rifle," Mina said calmly. "And I have the antidote. But it's going to hurt." Kelvin looked at her, really looked at her, for the second time. He saw the steel in her spine. Most Omegas would be cowering in the presence of an agitated royal guard. Mina Varkov stood there like a general. "Do it," Kelvin said. The next hour was not romantic. It was brutal, visceral survival. Mina didn't have magical elixirs. She had activated charcoal slurry, intended for livestock that ate poisonous weeds, and cases of cheap, high-proof whiskey she used for sterilizing equipment. The charcoal binds the toxin, Mina explained as she mixed a black sludge in a bucket. The alcohol speeds up your metabolism to burn through the wolfsbane residue. You're going to vomit, a lot, and then you're going to pass out. We need to fight, Bram argued, leaning against the wall for support. You can't fight if your nervous system shuts down in 20 minutes, Mina countered. She filled a tin cup with the black sludge. Bottoms up. She watched as the royal guard of the Blackwood dynasty, the most feared warriors on the continent, gagged down the mixture. One by one, they succumbed to the violent purging, their bodies expelling the poison. Mina moved among them, holding buckets, wiping mouths, offering water. She was tireless. Kelvin sat in the corner, the last to take the cure. He watched her work. He noticed how she didn't flinch at the smells or the sounds. She touched his men with a gentleness that contradicted her sharp words. When she finally came to him, cup in hand, he stopped her. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. "Mina." "No. Who are you really?" Kelvin's golden eyes bore into hers. "You have no pack mark. You have no scent. But you resisted my alpha voice earlier. An Omega shouldn't be able to do that." Mina hesitated. She looked at the cup in her hands. "My father was a beta. My mother. Nobody knows. She left me on his doorstep. I was tested at 12. They said my wolf was dormant, broken. So the local pack kicked me out. I'm nobody, Kelvin, just the girl who cleans up the mess." "You're not nobody," Kelvin murmured, taking the cup. His fingers brushed hers, and a spark, literal static electricity, snapped between them. Mina jerked back. Kelvin froze. That spark, that was the mate bond. But it was impossible. The mate bond only happened between compatible wolves. If she was a dull, there should be nothing. Kelvin downed the charcoal mixture before he could say anything stupid. The burning in his stomach distracted him from the sudden, terrifying realization that the woman saving his life might be the one fate had chosen for him. As Kelvin dry-heaved into a bucket, the barn lights flickered. Then they died completely. Outside, the wind had stopped howling. The silence was sudden and heavy. Mina grabbed her rifle. "They cut the power." "They're coming." Kelvin wiped his mouth, standing up shakily. The poison was leaving his system, but he was at maybe 40% strength. "Bram, Jax, front doors. The rest of you, flank the windows." The guard moved, weak but willing. Mina moved to the back of the barn, near the old generator. "I can get the emergency lights on, but it'll make noise. It'll give away my position." "Stay down, Mina," Kelvin ordered. "Let us handle this." "You can barely stand," Mina hissed. "I'm not hiding in the cellar while you get slaughtered in my barn." Before Kelvin could argue, the first glass shattered. A canister of tear gas smashed through the high loft window, hissing as it hit the concrete floor. "Gas!" Bram shouted. "Masks up!" They didn't have masks. They had T-shirts pulled over their noses. The barn doors exploded inward. Not blown off, but rammed. A matte black tactical truck smashed through the wood, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. Men in grey tactical gear poured out of the truck and through the windows. They weren't shifters. They were human mercenaries. Hired guns. Smart. Shifters were expensive and hard to control. Humans just wanted a paycheck. Gunfire erupted. Mina dove behind the generator as bullets pinged off the metal casing. The sound was deafening. The wolves, unable to shift fully due to exhaustion, were fighting in human form or partial shifts. Claws elongated, teeth bared. It was a chaotic brawl. Kelvin was a blur of violence. Even weakened, he moved faster than the human eye could track. He snapped the neck of one mercenary and used the body as a shield to advance on another. But there were too many of them. "Target the Alpha," a voice shouted from the truck. A man stepped out. This one was a shifter. He wore a long coat and held a high-caliber revolver. It was Raker, a notorious rogue mercenary known for hunting alphas for sport. Raker raised the gun, aiming squarely at Kelvin's back while the king was engaged with 2 attackers. Mina didn't think. She didn't calculate the odds. She just saw the shot lining up. She stood up from behind the generator, shouldered her hunting rifle, and fired. Boom! The shot went wide of Raker's head, but it hit the hydraulic line of the truck door next to him. The pressurized fluid sprayed into Raker's face, blinding him for a split second. "Sniper!" Raker screamed, wiping his eyes. "Get the bitch in the back!" 3 mercenaries turned their weapons toward Mina. Mina racked the bolt, ejecting the spent shell, but she wasn't fast enough. She saw the muzzle flashes. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the impact. It never came. A wall of black fur slammed into her, knocking her to the ground. Kelvin had shifted. He had crossed the barn in a heartbeat, taking the bullets meant for her into his own back. He roared, a sound that shook the dust from the rafters. It wasn't a roar of pain. It was a roar of absolute, unadulterated rage, the alpha protecting his mate. The sound paralyzed the human mercenaries. It triggered a primal fear response in their hindbrains. Kelvin didn't stop. He lunged from over Mina, tearing into the 3 men with a ferocity that turned the barn floor red. Seeing their leader blind and the Alpha King go berserk, the mercenaries faltered. "Retreat!" Raker yelled, firing blindly as he scrambled back into the driver's seat of the truck. "Fall back to the secondary line!" The mercenaries scrambled out, dragging their wounded. The truck reversed violently, smashing through the remaining debris of the door and speeding off into the dark. Silence fell over the barn again, broken only by heavy breathing and the drip of fluids. Mina scrambled out from under the hay where she had fallen. "Kelvin!" The massive black wolf stood in the center of the carnage. He was swaying. Blood matted the fur on his back where 3 distinct bullet holes oozed. He looked at her, his golden eyes dimming. He took 1 step toward her, then collapsed heavily onto his side. Mina sprinted to him, sliding on her knees through the blood. She pressed her hands to the wounds. No, you dumb dog. Why did you do that?" Bram limped over, clutching a knife wound in his thigh. He looked at the fallen king, then at Mina. His expression had changed. The disdain was gone, replaced by a confused respect. "He protected you," Bram said, his voice quiet. "He took lead for you." "Help me apply pressure!" Mina screamed at him. "Get the medkit, now!" As Bram ran to get the supplies, Kelvin shifted back to human form. He was conscious, but barely. He reached up, his bloody hand cupping Mina's cheek, smearing red on her pale skin. "You," he wheezed, a faint smile touching his lips. "You have a terrible aim." "Shut up," Mina sobbed, pressing a towel into his shoulder. "Don't you dare die on me, Kelvin Blackwood. I just cleaned these floors." Kelvin's eyes drifted shut. "Mina," he whispered. "My mate." Then he went limp. Mina froze. Bram froze, dropping the medkit. "What did he say?" Bram asked, his voice trembling. Mina stared at the unconscious king. The static electricity was humming under her skin, buzzing like a live wire. "He's hallucinating," Mina said quickly, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. "He's lost too much blood. Help me get him to the table." But as they lifted him, Mina saw it. On Kelvin's chest, right over his heart, a mark was forming. A glowing, intricate tattoo that only appeared when an alpha found his true match, and on Mina's wrist, hidden beneath her watch band, her skin began to burn. She wasn't a dull. She was something else entirely. And the king had just claimed her in front of his entire royal guard. The kitchen table had become an operating theatre. Mina's hands were steady, though her soul was shaking. She had doused her hands in whiskey and was using a pair of sanitized hemostats to dig for the bullet lodged near Kelvin's spine. "Hold him down," Mina ordered. Bram and another guard, a redhead named Jax, pinned Kelvin's shoulders. The king was thrashing in his unconscious state, his body fighting the intrusion. "It's deep," Mina gritted out, sweat stinging her eyes. "He's healing around the bullet. If the skin closes before I get it out, the infection will kill him." "Cut faster," Bram growled, though his eyes were fixed on Kelvin's face with terrified loyalty. Mina found the metal slug. With a sickening squelch, she pulled it free and dropped it into a metal bowl. "That's the last one. Pour the antiseptic." As Jax poured the alcohol over the wounds, Kelvin arched his back, a low, pained howl ripping from his throat. Then it happened again. The mark. As the blood was wiped away, the glowing rune over Kelvin's heart pulsed brighter. It wasn't just a tattoo, it was bioluminescence shining from beneath the skin. Bram stared at it, then grabbed Mina's wrist, yanking it out from under her sleeve. "Hey!" Mina shouted, trying to pull back. "Look," Bram whispered. On the inside of Mina's wrist, the skin was no longer pale. It was etched with silver veins, branching out like a lightning strike. The veins were throbbing in time with Kelvin's heart. "You aren't a dull," Bram said, his voice hollow with shock. "You never were." "I don't know what this is," Mina stammered. "My test result said—" "Your test results were faked," Bram interrupted, looking at her with a mix of awe and fear. "You have the Argentum gene, the silver blood." Mina blinked. "That's a fairy tale. The silver wolves went extinct 100 years ago." "They didn't go extinct," Bram said, releasing her wrist gently. "They were hunted because they were too powerful. Their presence alone can force an alpha to submit. They don't have a scent because they are the absence of aggression. They are pure balance." He looked at Kelvin. "An alpha king is volatile, violent. Only a silver wolf can balance his soul. That's why he's claiming you. That's why he took a bullet for you. His wolf knew what you were before you did." Mina stared at the silver lines on her arm. All her life, she had been treated like garbage, like a genetic mistake. And all this time, she had been hiding a crown in her blood. "It doesn't matter what I am," Mina said, her voice trembling. "It only matters if he wakes up." "He will wake up," a new voice boomed from outside the house. It was amplified by a megaphone cutting through the walls, "but only long enough to see you die." The guard stiffened. Mina walked to the living room window. The storm had broken. The sun was rising over the snow-covered tundra, bathing the world in blinding white light. Surrounding the sanctuary were not just mercenaries this time. There were wolves, dozens of them. A sleek, armored convoy of military vehicles sat in a semicircle. Standing on the hood of the lead vehicle was a man who looked like a twisted mirror image of Kelvin. He had the same dark hair, but his eyes weren't gold. They were a dull, hateful brown. "Damon!" Bram spat, coming up behind her. "The usurper." "Send out the Omega!" Damon's voice echoed over the ice. "Give me the girl and the body of my brother, and the rest of you can walk away. You have 5 minutes." Bram looked at the remaining 12 guards. They were battered, recovering from poison, and outnumbered 3-1. "We don't give her up," Bram said, turning to the men. "We die before she crosses that threshold. Protocol 0. "No," Mina said. Bram looked at her. "Mina, stay back." "He wants the girl?" Mina walked to the door, grabbing her heavy parka. "He can have her." "Are you insane?" Jax shouted. Mina turned, her eyes flashing. For a second, just a second, they weren't human brown. They were bright, piercing silver. "He thinks I'm a dull," Mina said coldly. "He thinks I'm a leverage point. He has no idea he's about to negotiate with a queen." She opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. The silence inside the barn was heavier than the snowdrifts piling up against the north wall. Inside, the air smelled of rubbing alcohol, copper blood, and the acrid, metallic scent of fear. Bram, the royal beta, stood by the reinforced door. He was bleeding from a shrapnel wound in his thigh, his face grey with exhaustion, but his grip on the hunting rifle was ironclad. He looked at the 12 remaining members of the Royal Guard. They were the finest warriors in the Northern Territory, but they were broken, poisoned, battered, and outgunned. "Protocol 0, Bram whispered, his voice cracking. The guard stiffened. They knew what that meant. It was the suicide protocol. Protect the Alpha King's body at all costs. No survivors expected. "No," Mina said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor blade. She stood by the makeshift operating table where Kelvin lay unconscious. His chest was rising and falling in a shallow, jagged rhythm. The glowing rune over his heart had dimmed, pulsing faintly like a dying ember. Mina looked at her own wrist. The silver veins were throbbing, hot against her skin, syncing with the beat of the king's heart. She didn't understand the biology of it. She didn't care about the legends of the Argentum or the Silver Wolf. She only knew that every time she felt fear, the heat in her arm spiked, turning into something else. Rage. "Mina, get back," Bram warned, limping away from the door to intercept her. "Damon isn't going to negotiate. He's here to execute everyone who saw his face. If you go out there, you're dead." "If I stay in here, we're all dead," Mina replied, grabbing her heavy parka from the hook. She zipped it up with steady hands, surprised by her own calm. It was a cold, detached clarity. "He thinks I'm a dull. He thinks I'm a waitress who got lucky. He wants to leverage me to get to Kelvin." "He will tear you apart before you get down the stairs," Jax, the redhead guard, argued, wiping blood from his eye. "I don't think he will," Mina said. She turned to look at them. For a fleeting second, the overhead emergency light seemed to flicker, reflecting off her irises. They weren't just brown anymore. There was a ring of mercury tightening around her pupils. "Because I'm not going out there to surrender." She walked past Bram. The massive beta reached out to stop her, his hand closing on her shoulder. "Mina." A shock of static electricity, strong enough to be audible, snapped between them. Bram hissed, jerking his hand back as if he'd touched a live wire. He looked at his palm, then at her, his eyes wide with a sudden, primal recognition. "Let me pass, Bram," Mina commanded. It wasn't a request. The tone vibrated in the base of Bram's skull. It was the tone of an alpha, but sharper, cleaner. Without thinking, Bram stepped aside. His wolf instinct obeyed before his human brain could process why. Mina unlocked the heavy deadbolt. She took a breath of the stale barn air, then pushed the door open. The world outside was blinding. The storm had broken, leaving the sky a piercing, cloudless blue. The sun reflected off 4 feet of fresh powder, turning the landscape into a sea of diamonds. Mina stepped onto the porch. The cold hit her instantly, 40 degrees below zero, but the fire inside her veins pushed it back. She felt like a furnace. She scanned the perimeter. It was worse than she had thought. Damon Blackwood hadn't just brought a hit squad. He had brought an occupation force. 6 armored SUVs, modified with heavy tread tires and bull bars, formed a semicircle around the sanctuary entrance. Behind them stood 24 men in tactical gear, human mercenaries holding AR-15s. But the real threat was in front of the vehicles. The pack, 30 wolves, massive hulking beasts with steam rising from their fur. Some were shifted, sitting on their haunches with teeth bared. Others were in human form, naked from the waist up, seemingly immune to the freezing temperatures thanks to their high metabolic burn. And in the center of it all, leaning against the hood of a matte black Ford Raptor, was Damon. He looked so much like Kelvin that it made Mina's stomach turn. The same broad shoulders, the same black hair. But where Kelvin was stoic and controlled, Damon was jagged. His energy was frantic, leaking out of him in waves of aggression. He held a megaphone in one hand and a heavy revolver in the other. "Well, well," Damon's voice boomed, amplified across the ice. "The little nursemaid actually exists." Mina walked down the stairs. 1 step, 2 steps. The snow crunched loudly under her boots. She stopped 10 yards from him. "Where is my brother?" Damon sneered, tossing the megaphone to one of his lackeys. He stepped forward, his boots sinking into the snow. "Did he bleed out on your rug?" "Tell me he suffered." "He's resting," Mina said. Her voice wasn't loud, but the wind seemed to carry it, dropping it right at Damon's feet. Damon laughed, a harsh, barking sound that lacked any real humor. "Resting, that's cute. You know, I expected him to come out here and roar, challenge me for the crown. But I guess the poison did its job." He looked Mina up and down, his gaze stripping her. It was a look of pure entitlement. "You're the Omega he was protecting. The one Raker said he took a bullet for?" Damon shook his head, spitting into the snow. "Pathetic. Kelvin always had a weakness for strays. He ruined the bloodline with his empathy." "Empathy is why his men die for him," Mina said, holding his gaze. "Greed is why yours are only here for a paycheck." The insult landed. A ripple of unease went through the wolves standing behind Damon. They were shifters. Hierarchy was everything to them. To hear a human, a suspected dull, speak to an alpha with such disrespect was unheard of. Damon's face darkened. The veins in his neck bulged. "Watch your mouth, bitch. I am the king now. And you are nothing. You are a genetic defect. A biological dead end." He took another step, pushing his aura toward her. In werewolf society, an alpha's aura is a physical weight. It triggers the flight response in weaker prey. It forces submission. Mina had felt it before, from local bullies in town. It usually made her knees weak, made her want to vomit. Damon pushed hard, intending to make her collapse face first into the snow. Mina felt the pressure hit her chest. It felt like a heavy woolen blanket. Uncomfortable, stifling, but manageable. She didn't kneel. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, staring at him. Damon frowned, confused. He pushed harder, his eyes flashing a muddy brown. "Submit." Mina tilted her head. "Is that it?" The silence that followed was absolute. The mercenaries shifted their grip on their rifles. The wolves pinned their ears back. "What did you say?" Damon whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "I said, is that all you have?" Mina took a step toward him. "You call yourself a king? Your pressure is weak, Damon. It feels like a child throwing a tantrum." Damon snapped. "Kill her!" he screamed, pointing the revolver at her face. "Tear her apart." 2 of Damon's enforcers, grey-furred wolves the size of small bears, launched themselves from the pack. They covered the distance in seconds, jaws snapping, aiming for Mina's throat. Time seemed to slow down. Mina saw the saliva flying from their jowls. She saw the madness in their eyes. Inside the house, she heard Bram scream her name. But inside her own body, the silver lock broke. The energy that had been building in her wrist flooded her system. It wasn't adrenaline. It was authority. Ancient, absolute, biological authority. Mina didn't raise her hands. She didn't run. She anchored her feet in the snow, looked directly at the lunging beasts, and opened her mouth. Sit! The word didn't sound like it came from her throat. It sounded like it came from the earth beneath them. It was a multi-tonal harmonic resonance that hit the wolves like a physical wall. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The two wolves didn't just stop. Their nervous systems hijacked their momentum. They slammed into the invisible barrier of the command, whimpering as they crashed into the snow. Their legs folded under them, forcing them into a submissive belly crawl. They covered their noses with their paws, whining in high-pitched terror. Damon stumbled back, dropping his gun. He clutched his head, his human ears ringing. "What?" Damon gasped, blinking tears from his eyes. "What the hell was that?" Mina stood over the two cowering wolves. Her breathing was heavy, vapor pluming in the cold air. She felt drained, but powerful. "I told you," Mina said, her voice returning to normal, but carrying a new, dangerous edge. "I am Mina Varkov, and this is my sanctuary. You are trespassing." Damon looked at his enforcers, his best killers, groveling at the feet of a tiny woman in a parka. Panic flared in his eyes. Panic and humiliation. "She's a witch!" Damon shrieked, turning to the mercenaries. "She's using some kind of sonic weapon. Shoot her! Shoot her now!" The human mercenaries were confused. They hadn't felt the command the way the wolves had. They just saw targets. "Target acquired," the lead mercenary muttered into his comms. He raised his rifle. Mina froze. Her voice worked on wolves. It didn't work on bullets. She saw the finger tighten on the trigger. Boom! The windshield of the mercenary's truck exploded inward. The lead mercenary dropped, a hole in his shoulder, screaming. Damon spun around toward the house. "Sniper! Take cover!" On the porch of the sanctuary, Bram stood propped against the railing, working the bolt of the hunting rifle with blurring speed. Clack, clack. He fired again. Another mercenary went down, clutching his leg. "Suppressing fire," Damon yelled, diving behind the Ford Raptor. The remaining mercenaries opened up. The air was filled with the deafening crack of automatic gunfire. Bullets shredded the wood of the porch, blowing out the windows of the barn. Mina dove into the snow, crawling behind the engine block of one of the disabled SUVs. Wood splinters and glass rained down around her. "Bram!" she screamed, looking back at the house. The beta had been hit. He was slumped against the doorframe, blood pouring from a new wound in his side. But he was still firing, buying her time. "Flanker!" Damon's voice roared from the other side of the truck. "Forget the house! Get the girl! She's the weapon!" Mina scrambled backward, but a hand grabbed her ankle. She looked down. It was one of the mercenaries. He had crawled under the chassis. He grinned, his teeth stained with tobacco, and yanked her hard. Mina kicked him in the face, but he was wearing a helmet. He dragged her out into the open. "Got her!" the mercenary yelled, pulling a knife. Mina struggled, clawing at the snow, but he was too heavy. He pinned her down, raising the blade. "Say good night, sweetheart." The barn door exploded. It wasn't opened. It was obliterated. A massive, dark shape tore through the wood like a cannonball, moving so fast it was a blur of shadow. The mercenary on top of Mina didn't even have time to scream. One moment, he was holding a knife. The next, he was gone. He had been tackled with enough force to launch him 20 feet through the air. He hit the side of a truck with a sickening crunch and crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Mina scrambled up, gasping for air. Standing between her and the army was a monster. It was a wolf, but it was unlike any of the others. It was jet black, standing nearly 5 feet at the shoulder. Its fur was matted with dried blood and fresh bandages that were already shredding under the expansion of its muscles. But it was the eyes that froze everyone in their tracks. Gold. Molten, burning gold. "Kelvin!" He roared. It wasn't a warning. It was a declaration of war. The sound was so loud it shook the snow off the pine trees nearby. It was the roar of an Alpha Prime, the apex. Damon, peeking out from behind the truck, turned pale. Impossible! He was dying. I saw the toxicology report. He should be dead. Kelvin didn't look at the army. He turned his massive head to look at Mina. He checked her for wounds in a split second, sniffing the air. Finding her unharmed, he turned back to his brother. He shifted. The transformation was brutal and fluid. Kelvin stood up, his human form naked, steam rolling off his skin in the freezing air. The wounds on his chest were angry red scars knitting together before their eyes. He walked toward Damon. He didn't run. He walked with the terrifying casualness of a man who knows he is the most dangerous thing in the solar system. "You brought humans to a pack dispute," Kelvin said. His voice was gravel, deep and vibrating with violence. "You broke the covenant, Damon." Damon scrambled back, fumbling for his revolver in the snow. "Stay back. I have the numbers. Pack. Kill him. He's weak. He's injured." The 30 wolves in Damon's army looked at Kelvin. Then they looked at Damon. They didn't move. "He's right," Kelvin said, stepping over the body of a mercenary. "I am injured." He stopped 5 feet from his brother. "But I have something you don't." Kelvin reached back, his hand open. Mina didn't need to be told. She felt the pull. The static in her blood was screaming at her to touch him, to complete the circuit. She ran forward and grabbed Kelvin's hand. The moment skin touched skin, the air around them ignited. A shockwave of silver and gold light blasted outward, kicking up a ring of snow dust. Mina gasped as she felt her energy, the Argentum power, being siphoned out of her. It didn't hurt. It felt like relief. It poured into Kelvin, fueling his exhausted cells, supercharging his regeneration. The glowing rune on Kelvin's chest flared to life, blindingly bright. The silver veins on Mina's arm glowed to match it. Kelvin threw his head back and inhaled. His muscles swelled, the last of his fatigue evaporating. He squeezed Mina's hand, anchoring himself to her. "My mate," Kelvin growled, the words echoing with dual voices, man and wolf, "and your queen." Damon stared at the glowing bond. The realization hit him like a freight train. "Argentum?" Damon whispered, horror dawning on his face. "The silver blood. It wasn't a myth." "It was never a myth," Kelvin said softly. "It was just waiting for someone worthy." Damon screamed, a sound of pure desperation, and raised the revolver. He fired point blank at Kelvin's chest. Bang! Kelvin didn't dodge. He caught the bullet. His hand moved faster than sound. He snatched the round out of the air just before it hit his sternum. His palm smoked, but he simply opened his hand and let the flattened piece of lead drop into the snow. Damon pulled the trigger again. Click. Misfire. Kelvin lunged. He didn't shift this time. He didn't need to. He grabbed Damon by the throat and slammed him into the side of the Ford Raptor. The metal crumpled inward, forming a crater around Damon's body. "I gave you the Southern Territory," Kelvin snarled, pinning his brother against the shattered grill. "I gave you wealth. I gave you power. And you sold our people out to mercenaries." "I did it for the pack," Damon choked out, clawing uselessly at Kelvin's arm. "You were weak. You wanted peace with the humans. We are predators, Kelvin. We should be ruling them. We are protectors," Kelvin roared, tightening his grip. "Not butchers." Damon's eyes rolled back. He was losing consciousness. Suddenly, the remaining mercenaries, realizing they weren't being paid enough for this supernatural nightmare, made a break for it. Engines revved. "Don't let them leave," Kelvin commanded, without looking away from his brother. The 30 wolves of Damon's army, the ones who had been watching, waiting to see who was stronger, finally made their choice. They turned on the fleeing mercenaries. Tires were shredded by claws. Windshields were smashed. It was swift, brutal justice. Kelvin let go of Damon. His brother slid down the front of the truck, gasping for air, defeated. Kelvin turned to Mina. The golden light in his eyes faded to a warm, soft amber. The adrenaline was starting to crash, but the bond was still humming, a steady, warm vibration between their palms. He looked at her parka, torn at the shoulder. He looked at the bruise forming on her cheek. "You defended the sanctuary," Kelvin said, his voice filled with awe. "You stood against an army with nothing but your voice." Mina's knees started to shake. Now that the threat was gone, the reality of what she had just done was crashing down on her. "I was really scared, Kelvin," she whispered. "I know," he said, stepping closer and wrapping his arms around her. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling deeply. "I felt it. But you stood anyway. That is what makes a queen." An hour later, the silence had returned to the Black Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary. The mercenaries were zip-tied and lined up by the barn, guarded by the very wolves they had arrived with. Damon was in irons, locked in the reinforced cellar that Mina usually used for storing root vegetables. Inside the barn, the atmosphere had shifted from a war zone to a recovery ward. Dr. Aris Vane, the pack doctor who had arrived with the second wave of reinforcements, was stitching up Bram's side. The beta was grumpy, drinking Mina's cheap whiskey as an anesthetic. But he was alive. Mina sat on a crate near the heater, holding a mug of hot cocoa. Her hands were still trembling slightly. Kelvin sat on the floor in front of her. He was dressed in fresh clothes, sweatpants and a thick wool sweater that belonged to Mina's ex-boyfriend, a detail Kelvin had grumbled about extensively. He was holding her wrist, examining the silver veins. They had faded now, looking like faint, pearlescent scars. "Does it hurt?" he asked quietly. "No," Mina said. "It feels dormant, like it's sleeping." Kelvin ran his thumb over the mark. "The Argentum gene is rare, Mina. 1 in a billion. It's a genetic balancing agent. Nature creates a silver wolf when the alpha bloodlines become too aggressive, too violent. You were created to stop men like Damon, to stop men like me." Mina looked at him. "I didn't stop you. I saved you." "Same thing," Kelvin said, looking up at her. His eyes were intense. "Without you, my wolf would have consumed me years ago. The rage, it's always there. But when you're near, it's quiet. It's peace." He leaned his cheek against her palm. It was a gesture of absolute submission and trust. The king of the north, resting at the feet of the outcast. "So," Mina said, trying to lighten the mood, though her voice was thick with emotion. "Does this mean I get a raise? Because the sanctuary is a wreck. I need a new front door, new windows, and I'm pretty sure your brother dented my truck." Kelvin chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "I think we can manage that. I have access to the royal treasury." "Good," Mina said. "And one more thing. Anything. No more dying on my floor," she said sternly. "It's really hard to get blood out of concrete." Kelvin smiled. It was a genuine, boyish smile that took 10 years off his face. He stood up, towering over her, and pulled her into a kiss. It tasted like cocoa and survival. "Deal," he whispered against her lips. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of pink and purple. The wolves were howling, not in distress, but in victory. A new era had begun for the Northern Territory, the era of the Silver Queen. And that is how a defective outcast named Mina Varkov ended up sitting on the throne of the Blackwood dynasty. The media called it a fairy tale, but the police report from that night in Coldfoot, Alaska, simply lists the incident as a territorial dispute involving local wildlife. But we know the truth. Mina wasn't just saving wolves, she was saving her destiny. According to pack records released years later by a historian named Dr. Oris Vane, Kelvin and Mina are still ruling the Northern Territory today. They say she never lets him go on patrol without her. And honestly, I don't blame her. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And tell me in the comments, if you found a wolf freezing in your backyard, would you have brought him inside? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more true tales of the supernatural. Until next time, stay safe in the snow.